I get our recording going. Hi, guys. All right.
Hello.
How's everyone doing?
Hello, Bob. Hello, Ruben.
Yeah, I'm doing good. How you doing?
All right, Bob, we'll get it to you. You had a topic to propose for today. Something about the free speech and the limits of sanity. Okay.
Well, there's no sanity at all in this country anymore, so there's nothing to talk about.
We only see your mouth and nose. You know, it looks like you're walking through or you're walking on water. Okay. Now you're settled.
I moved to closer to the Wi-Fi. I think I have better connection here.
We hear you. I hear you. Okay.
All right, I have to put on my glasses so you guys can chat while I find my glasses.
Okay. Well, we're waiting for you. You're anxious to tell us about why the free speech is under attack or attacked under the free speech, whichever one it is.
Okay, so you guys all know about the 3 deans of the Ivy League schools who spoke to Congress, right?
We
Yes.
heard of it, yes.
Yeah, well, I want to pick up on one of their ideas was that there was a difference between speech and action, and that speech of any type should be allowed as long as it doesn't lead to action. And as the dean of Harvard made clear, you can walk around the campus of Harvard and call for the genocide of Jews as long as you don't actually try to kill a Jew. And that's kind of the idea that led to her getting into so much trouble. And of course, all 3 of them are in trouble. One has already resigned, and the others probably will resign. So I'm going to begin by asking if they even know what is the definition of free speech. And in the United States, free speech is based on the First Amendment to the Constitution. Is based on the First Amendment to the Constitution, and the Founding Fathers envisioned free speech as meaning speech that can challenge the government, that we are free to discuss the government and free to speak about those who are leaders without fear of being imprisoned. That speech by James Madison and by the Founding Fathers was never intended to be hate speech or speech about from the river to the sea, or to kill the Jews. That's not the definition of free speech. So even by the American definition, these 3 deans are wrong. And the protests on campus, which are leading to fear among Jewish students, is not free speech by anyone's definition. So I'd like to go on to talk about what is the Jewish view of free speech. And we'll begin by focusing on what is the power of the word. And we know the world was created by speech. So speech is directly connected to Hashem. And that's how we would begin, by understanding speech. Now let's look at speech in terms of biblical figures. We begin with Abraham debates God before the destruction of Sodom. Why was he doing that? Was he actually challenging God? And the answer is no. The rabbis say that he was challenging God in the sense that he wanted the world not to misunderstand what God was doing. He wanted people to know that God was righteous, that God was just, and that the words of Abraham were to support actually God's speech and God's actions. So here speech is being used. Actually, Abraham's speech was being used to glorify the will of God and to perfect justice. Then we can look at Jacob wrestling with the soul of Esau. This was an example of action, and it was also an example of speech. And we can see here that this is a combination, that when Jacob fought the angel, he was actually combining speech with action. And we see in Jewish thought that speech and action and free will are all tied together in this example of speech. If we go on to look at Psalms, there's another example of speech in the Bible. And we're not going to go through every Psalm, but we can see that David uses speech to connect with God. So in all three examples, whether it's Abraham, Jacob, or Psalms, we see that speech is always being used either to connect to God or glorify God. So anyway, I looked again at Tanya, as I always like to do, and we see that speech and action are very much connected, that thought leads to speech, leads to action. They are all tied together in Tanya. And this waterfall-like cascade, that thought leads to speech, leads to action, is supposed to be a reflection of God. And we know that God's thinking is called supernal thought, and it's chachma, bin, and da'at. And it is from there that the midos of God is formed, such as gevura and chesed. And we are supposed to reflect that from thought comes human emotion, comes action. And again, we see in Jewish thought that speech, thought, and action are all tied together. So what is the connection between speech and free will? In this sense, it is that the use of speech as a reflection of free will must be in the service of Torah. And we have learned that thought, speech, and action are all free will and must be used in the service of Torah. And you talk about free will, we're all considered to be Beinoni. We're the average Joe. That's what a Beinoni is. And a Beinoni's job in life is to control his emotions and to have his emotions reflect intellectual thought and proper use of words and action. So anyway, that's the difference between what these Ivy League deans were saying and what Judaism says. Their thought is that we can speak and say any words we want as long as we don't act on those words. And yet in Jewish thought, we see that speech, thought, and action are really tied up as one in one neat package, and that there's a huge difference how a Jew sees the world as opposed to how the Western world of the United States views these issues. So that was what I wanted to say on that subject, if anyone has any comments on these issues. And I want to tell you, there was something really interesting last night on TV, because one of the, there's a show called Gutfeld on Fox News, and one of the younger people on that show said she still believes in unfettered free speech, and that people can say what they want, even if it's hateful. And I was surprised to hear that. You would think everyone had learned their lesson by now. So now we have an airplane going over. But anyway, what are your thoughts about the First Amendment, about America's obsession today about free speech, and anyone can say whatever they want, as opposed to the way Jews see the world?
I would say, Bob, that free speech and action are tied to one another. When people say words to other human beings, they're expecting some kind of response from them. And if they're saying negative words to somebody else, they're expecting a negative response. So it's not just a neutral activity.
I think that's a good observation, Howard, because I've never heard it put that way, that they are expecting a response. Do you think the Palestinians and students who march on Harvard Yard and they're calling for the genocide of the Jews, do you think they're expecting a reaction?
Absolutely. And the expected reaction can be anticipated.
Well, that is
intentional.
So that is a direct connection, you're saying, between speech and action, and the deans have it wrong, even by their intention.
Yes.
Well, they're hypocritical because, I mean, imagine if a group of white students called for genocide against blacks, you know? You think that would be considered just have to put that into context? I mean, it wouldn't be put in context at all. Or if they called for genocide against trans people. You know, it's Harvard's already given people a hard time because like one professor, in response to Black Lives Matter, said all lives matter, and was severely chastised for that. So, you know, it's just these people are they're hypocrites. They it was a good point made in an editorial in Wall Street Journal today, um, by Gerald Baker, and he points out that the president of Harvard, Claudine Gay. So after all that negative feedback she got, she made some little video in which she said she said, I got caught up in what had become at that point an extended combative exchange about policy and procedure. She said, substantively, I failed to convey what is my truth. And Gerard writes, few phrases are as reliable as my truth for identifying seasoned purveyors of cant and double talk. Truth isn't something that can be identified or modified by a possessive pronoun. If my truth is different from your truth and your truth is different from her truth, these aren't truths. My truth is the device deployed to elevate a particular viewpoint of a member of a particular group or identity by claiming the validation of the truth for a narrow ideological cause. I think that was an interesting point. Like he says, you can call for the murder of all Jews, but say sex is biological and you will be punished. It's all total hypocrisy. She's just, and I understand where she's coming from. All her friends are these far left, narrative people. If she doesn't, if she says, well, yes, that violates our school policy, then the next question is, why didn't you do anything about it? Why didn't you punish or disapprove of it? But then, of course, if she says, well, we will, then all the Muslim and far lefties will start screaming, yelling that she should be thrown out. It's just, she's dug her own grave, so to speak. She's one of these, leftist fanatics who, believe in identity politics. And the Jews now are no longer considered an oppressed group. They're considered white oppressors. So Israel is defined in these fanatical crazies as an oppressor of the poor, suffering Palestinians. And we're not worthy of, so if you rape, murder, and torture Jews, that's no big deal, because we had it coming. It's a sick, demented, pathetic way of looking at the world. But, we've seen that before in Lenin and Stalin. That same idea, it's okay to punish people you don't agree with. It's okay to ridicule them, to imprison them, to torture them. I mean, Solzhenitsyn describes in the Gulag Archipelago the tortures that Stalin's KGB used. They're, comparable to what Hamas did. So, it's not much to do, but you have to stand up against it. It's damaging, terrible stuff. I don't know. The human beings just seem to be prone to this and going after these crazy philosophies. The Khmer Rouge, the Nazis, the Stalinists, the Maoists. They, I don't know what it is with the human race. We just have this tendency to go crazy and go looking for,
well, what we see
madness
is,
every now and then.
well, we Jews have an ethical basis of speech. And the question is, what can we do? We're supposed to be the light of the world. What can we do to spread this knowledge? I don't know if we're very good at communicating that the word has to be based on Torah, it has to be based on Bible, it has to be based on ethics. And it seems that we have not been able to teach any of this to other cultures. It's something that we've sort of failed on.
Well, I will add, maybe what I'll say now, I'm sure David will comment on top of that as well, because this is, I mean, to me, I a while back came to this conclusion that democracy, it's probably the option like number 6 or 7 for the humanity. Because once you have democracy, then you have debate. Like, for example, what Ruben quoted, it's like, I know when I was in Russia, we used to joke, like somebody asked a question, like a combative debate. Says, what do you think about such and such? And then the response will be, well, if you consider circumstances under which such a phenomena would be defined, then the opposite of the situation will be diametrically congruent with a supposition that was never made and now therefore should be identified. Not a single word makes any sense, but you just say words together from a dictionary just reading. That is why I think in democracy, it's like you can debate it all you want, and you can go to a Webster dictionary. What to me, the right thing is monarchy, Davidic monarchy. We have a King David. At the point, the guy said, shoot him. And because he's a king, but nobody else can do that. And if the king decides not to shoot him, then nothing happens. Ultimately, this is nobody will debate it. Does he have a right? It doesn't have a right. Of course, we pray that the king will be good and not desperate and not to do things as Bob just mentioned. There will be another Stalin and Lenin or something else. But we hope that God will take care. And if it's for Israel, it will be a good God, a good king. And if it's in Sweden, it will be a good Swedish king. It's America, it will be a good American king. But in the end of the day, it's impossible to define what can you do, what you can do. It will be 350 million people in America. One guy said, well, she has the right to say it. Another guy said, no, she doesn't. And another guy says, well, the students should be fired. And another one said, no, they only should be disciplined. They should be on probation. They'll give all millions options because there is no ultimate authority. And anybody in America will hear what I'm saying right now. They say, well, this is our 13th century barbarism I'm advocating. King, we all have democracy, we're enlightened. Well, this is what enlightenment leads to. The people completely have no moral compass, no common ground. They just debate back and forth with words. That's why I vote for there's a king. He does have a council, and the council should be wise. They should advise to the king. Sometimes they should, no, king, maybe you shouldn't do that. But if king says, okay, thank you for your advice. But anyway, that's it.
It will only work in a society where there's a consensus of a moral compass. I mean, I've long felt for a number of years now that to have a healthy democracy, you need at least a minimum, a number of people who have a religious orientation or are willing to follow religious principles based upon what they call a Judeo-Christian, ethics. Without a minimum number of those, you start getting fracturing in society. It's very hard to maintain. We've had kings in the modern era. We have Mao as a king, Stalin was a king, and that didn't work out so well. It's
that's why
because they were adherents to a perverted and a ungodly philosophy, in which the individual basic idea. I mean, as was expressed by one philosopher, the idea of in Western civilization is that every individual is of infinite worth before God, and each individual is sovereign before God. You can't judge people just as a group. You only can judge people as their individual behavior. That's a principle. It comes from the Torah. And this leftist philosophy and Marxist philosophy is based on the idea of groups. And, it's like which group you're in is the key thing. What you individually do doesn't really matter that much. And it's interesting. I was just reading Chovos Levovos, and he says very clearly in there that one of the commentators says that communism is a modern commentator, a rabbi. Communism demanding, shared property, lack of private property. See, one of the things that Judaism says is everybody's entitled to private property. One of the things you do with your property is you can give tzedakah. You can help other people. And each man helping another gives everybody a sense of worth and a value. And if you take that away, you're undermining a critical piece of what society is based on. So on multiple levels, communism is just a failed philosophy. But when you take away God, people are desperate to find something and they'll attach themselves to anything. So yeah, I don't think a king will work unless you had society universally believing in principles of God and principles of individual rights to certain basic sovereignty before God.
And Lev, didn't you also notice how interesting it is that in those congressional hearings, not a single word was said about the ethics of speech? No one said, what about ethical speech? You know, the founding fathers were not religious, but they did believe in God and they did believe in the teachings of the Bible, even though they weren't religious. And that's the founding of our nation. And that's been lost now. So you could propose and say, our nation's really lost because without that foundation, what is any discussion of speech going to lead us to?
I think so, because if you take a group of people without the king and without the Torah, I agree with Reuven. You can't be just a king because Mao and Stalin examples were brought. But yeah, the king is the Torah. According to the Bible, according to the Torah, king's supposed to have 2 copies of Torah. He writes one, he walks with it, second one. So it's a very Torah, Bible abiding society. And if you don't have that, if you have a group of people that get together and decide, this is the laws we have. And the law is now the law of the land. Let's say completely secular people. 20 years later, will be another group of people. Things change and say, well, we don't like this law. We'll change it. Another 20 years later, it'll change again. You'll never have anything absolute. It will be different. And then if you happen to have a society after 50 years that they what do you call this in English? The people who eat people,
Cannibals.
Cannibals come in, they say it's normal to eat people. Okay, and if the guy is weak, we can eat him. And but you only can eat 2 people a day, And then what are you gonna say? This is society decides. So society can. I don't think there's a solution for America. I don't think solution for the world. I think the hope is I hope and pray that they will come to the senses and stop doing this, stop robbing Walmarts and burning cars and doing. I hope they do, but how are they going to get to it? I mean, maybe they still some inertia coming, as you said, from founding fathers, that they still have sense of decency left over, and basically they say, and some people do speak out, so that's not right. But it's all carry over from the past, from 200, 300 years ago, when the founding father created society the best they could based on some absolute principles. God. Once you take it away, it's just so what? If this 20 people will decide we're going to make a country this way, and this 20 people decide, well, this way, you'll never agree anything. So you hope and pray somehow to work out, but it's a sad situation for America. I hope you'll come to its senses, but I don't know what solution is. Sometimes in life, David and I talked about a little bit earlier, sometimes in life, there's a situation, they have a 5 options, none of them is good. You're trying to find solution.
I'd like to read just one paragraph from George Washington's farewell address from this is in 1796. And he says, wait, let me find it. Here. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. The mere politician, equally with the pious man, ought to respect and cherish them. A volume could not trace all their connections with private and public felicity. Let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation deserts the oaths which are the instruments of investigation in courts of justice? And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know he said that in the farewell address.
Yeah. You should look up his farewell address. It's very, very profound.
Well, what are you going to do? Let's say that in America, Supreme Court judges or any political, when the crowd, without violence necessarily, stands in front of the guy's house and there was a megaphone yelling how horrible the guy is, and the guy is at home with his wife and kids having dinner. And well, do they have a right?
That's the fault of the leftist cowardly creeps who are in charge of all the cities. They're cowards. They're scum. They should have the police out there and round up and jail every one of them. But the leftist scum who run these cities are relying upon a big section of this far left support, and they won't do anything because they become cowards. That's all.
Oh, also
They
these,
don't have any values. They don't believe in anything. So, you know, the only thing they believe in is power, and whatever supports their power, you know, they'll back up.
It's
David,
like
what do you
these-
think? You didn't say much. We'll see what David will say.
I think the funny thing about what's happening in the United States is that there's this. I remember there's this video of Ben Shapiro in a debate, or was it? I don't think it was a debate. He was giving this lecture that he gives when he visits universities, and of course then they always come the far left students and some of their professors, and they come and say, well, the speech he basically was debating this young professor, the young woman who's already a professor. She said that what he's doing is violence because speech is violence, and they are promoting this idea that speech is violence because this is why they have safe spaces in American universities because speech is violence. And when you go into a safe space is made for a group of students to basically gather together in that particular space, and in that space, no one can say anything against what these people think and believe. So if you have a group of Democratic students, and all of a sudden a Republican comes in, they start melting. So a Republican cannot. This is a safe space where a Republican student cannot enter. So and this is an idea that is all across American colleges and universities, as far as I know, and I think they also have safe spaces in the United Kingdom, in France, in Germany. This is like a very strange generation. For them, speech is violence. But then to say that it's from the river to the sea, and it's okay to kill Jews, that's not violence, because Jews
Because they
uh,
agree with it. They agree with it, so it's not violent. It doesn't upset
they
their
agree
ears.
with it, so it's because it's not violent. Yeah, exactly. And also because you also have to explain. You have to give yourself like an explanation. Well, how does it work? And the only explanation that you can have is that Jews are not people. This is a very known Christian belief, and it led to the idea of Mein Kampf, that led to the Holocaust. And so, I mean, you can only be civilized and have speech with other, civilized people, but they have to be a people.
They're
They have to be
worthwhile
human
people, yeah.
beings. They have to be human beings, So we are not human beings. Now, this idea is steeped in Christianity. These people are more Christian than they can ever believe. They are so Christian, I would put each and every one of them in the Vatican, because these ideas came out of the Vatican. Not yesterday, not last week, but 1700 years ago, 1600 years ago, that's exactly what happened. And this is now a sort of a strange kind of culmination of people who basically claim to be, most of them, atheists and non-religious at the very least. They don't care about religion. They don't really care about their own people. They don't care about their own culture. They're the very culture that gave them the freedoms that they enjoy, because they have been indoctrinated to hate it. So everything that contributes to the destruction of their own society is now, how should I put it? It's a grand intellectual, hip stuff. It's fashionable. In other words, it's
Yeah,
fashionable to be an atheist.
that's why they support Muslims, because Muslims also want to tear down Western society.
Exactly. And they don't know how, on one hand, how Christian they are, and I'm talking about the Westerners there, but also how Muslim they are, because the feeling, this entire hierarchy of victimhood that they have created, that is now enabling this speech against Jewish people in general. This is now, Israel is just an excuse. It's so easy. Just think about it. Isn't it strange that it's so easy to lit up, just like that. You only need the smallest match to immediately lit up this old hatred against Jews in 20-year-old young Americans who've never suffered anything under the hands of the Jews. Maybe they have a Jewish friend in college. Maybe they had a Jewish friend in the class when they were in primary school, at the high school. Maybe they have Jewish neighbors. Nothing ever happened. But then you say one thing, and all of a sudden, all this, crazy anti-Semitism is woken. How can you explain that? How can you rationalize that? It's irrational.
Mhm.
This is why I've been claiming for some years now that I think that anti-Semitism in the West, it was a spiritual thing. It came from a spiritual, sort of a religious, basically not spiritual, but religious reason. It was a mental thing. It was a religious hatred. But now it's not a religious or cultural hatred. It's a genetic disease. It's in their bodies. It's these people are zombies. Okay, you're fighting zombies, and Muslims they take advantage of that because they know these people have this genetic problem of being anti-Semitic. You don't have to do much. You just have to chant something against Israel, and it works.
Well, this Rabbi David Rao from the United Kingdom says that
Very good, David.
why can you just snap your fingers and get, over 100,000 people ready to march against Israel? Whereas you could, 500,000 Arabs could be murdered in Syria and like nobody cares. He says it's because Jews and Israel represent light, and darkness hates light. And the darkness is aroused and pitches into a fury when they're exposed to light. So it's that's the way I see it. It's a
No,
hatred of God.
On a
The
practical
Jews
side, sorry, Ruben, just one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
On a practical note, I know that I read that, and I actually didn't read. I saw this, I think a half an hour, 30 something minutes video on YouTube explaining why the American education system is basically so, left wing. And it's because that left wing socialist powers have taken control over American education system from
And they have,
kindergarten to universities in the 1920s. It's very interesting, a very interesting video. But basically, it was like it was just left to them, and so and then when you had Marcuse, right, Herbert Marcuse coming to the United States and starting, teaching his neo-Marxist views in American
he
universities.
called for the education system to be infiltrated.
Yeah,
And,
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. And so it's not just like this, mystical thing. It's very, very real. It's people are doing it. Have been doing it for like decades. It's almost 100 years now. We're in 2023.
David, you're not saying that a lack of religion is our problem because you're saying that Christianity itself has a problem, as does Islam. I think what you're saying is that we are going through another natural cycle where the Jews are welcomed into a country, they become rich, and then they're thrown out. You seem to be saying it's just part of the natural order as Torah teaches us. And whether it's that we were thrown out eventually of all the Arab countries, Europe, Germany, or the United States, that has nothing to do with religion. It's just that our time in America has come to an end. That seems to be what you're saying.
some people say the Jews are like the canary in the coal mine. When a society is going through collapse and stress, immediately anti-Semitism rises up, especially when people are struggling with identity. I mean, this bringing up this media expert, Marshall McLuhan, said that whenever there's people have problems with identity and defining their identity, it always leads to violence. And I think especially young people in America are really confused. There's a high level of depression, suicide, anxiety, because they don't really know what's going on. They don't have any solid way of thinking about themselves or what society is, what the universe is about. And they just get depressed and sad. They don't have a sense of purpose, which religion gives, but they've abandoned all that. It's an interesting, I saw one article written by two Jewish professors saying that they think the real reason religion has become so irrelevant in American life is because the schools started treating it that way. They started treating religion as something like a hobby, not something important, just something sort of trivially unimportant. You could do it like you would play cards or poker or bridge, but it's not something serious to be taken seriously, and that pervaded the society. It's not just science that people believe in, but it's this minimizing the importance of religion.
David, modern Christianity has become more and more benign towards the Jews, and the born-again Christians are very much on the side of the Jews in certain ways. I'm not so sure that Christianity is the answer. I think that, as Ravenna said, that it has to do with a lack of religion, that, even the minimal religion that was given to us by the founding fathers has disappeared. And I think you're right. I think it is a lack of direction and a lack of basis as to, when we talk about free speech, what is the basis of what should or should not be said? What is the purpose to all of our speech? And somehow it turns to the Jews.
Well, we brought the Torah, so they hate the Torah, they hate the rules, they hate the idea of God, and so they, we were the bringers of that burden. They want to throw it off. So let's see how well that works.
I told a friend of mine that you look at history. Sorry, you look at history, and there's always a point where Jews find themselves in the most absurd position. Like they are being, and the most absurd is that Jews are being killed and blamed at the same time. They are killed because they made us do it. It's their fault. And so this is why also we are in this situation where Douglas Murray said, who Douglas Murray is, guys?
No,
He's a British he's a British intellectual, a writer, author, and a commentary man. He wrote books like The Strange Death of Europe and The Madness of Crowds. He's a very known critic of the far left and the political correctness culture and all of that, the woke culture. He said in
50 seconds and make it quick.
Guys, we only have 40 seconds.
He said on British television, Israel is the only country is not allowed to win.
Guys, we only have 30 seconds. Let's land it on a positive note. We will be disconnected in 30 seconds. Let's have on a positive note with a hope and spirit that maybe God will send the message or whatever to fix it.
We want Mashiach now.
Mashiach now for the.
Thank you, Lev.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah, gentlemen. Let's pray all will work out. The humanity will find its sanity and the peace will come to the world, especially on this good.
Well, eventually.
As soon
Good
as
to
possible,
see you, Bob.
right now. All right, guys. Shabbat Shalom.